There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
Over the years, there have been reports of something strange in Flores. Flores is a small island which extends east of Indonesia. Now, these reports, if they are to be believed, describe a small creature, one that stands not more than 1.5 meters tall and which lives in the forests of Flores. They aren't human, not human like you or I. They have flat noses and are supposedly very hairy. The locals call them Ibugogo. The Ibugogo don't speak any known language according to legend, and if they are there are not many of them left. You see, the legends also have it that in the 18th century, local natives who were sick of the Ibugogo stealing their children, decided to put a stop to it. They tricked some of the Ibugogos into accepting clothes made of palm fibers. Palm fiber, by the way, is highly flammable. The little creatures carried the clothes back into their cave, and the locals quietly followed them. Satisfied that all of the Ibugogo were present, the locals tossed fire into the cave, and the palm fibers instantly ignited. The Ibugogo didn't stand a chance. But the legends also tell us a couple of the creatures escaped into the forest, perhaps a couple of the opposite sex, and perhaps they are hiding in the shadows, hoping not to be found. The tales of the Ibugogo are, of course, unsubstantiated legends, and those legends have been handed down orally amongst the locals. There are no indications that the forests of Flores were ever home to a small, hairy, unknown species of hominid. But in 2003, something was found that challenged the notion that the stories of the Ibugogo were only stories, and this something was also found in a cave, a large limestone cave located in Liang Bua. A team of Australian and Indonesian archaeologists began digging in the cave. They were looking for artifacts or bones that would help them to understand the migration of modern humans from Asia to Australia. And being that Flores was a stepping stone on the path to Australia, it made sense to look there. And they began their work in 2001, and at first they found the usual things, or at least the expected things. They found bones that belonged to Komodo dragons, they found bones for rats, and also stegodons. And stegodons are an extinct part of the elephant family, but the ones that lived on Flores were dwarfs. The last one is said to have walked the island 12,000 years ago. And while the bones were interesting, they weren't what the team was looking for. And then, in 2003, all of that changed. The team uncovered a skull, a small skull, which they at first identified with being that of a small child. Upon further examination, there was something odd about the skull. It didn't appear to be exactly what they assumed it to be at first, and one of the team's archaeologists, Peter Brown of the Australian National University, he'd smuggled some mustard seeds into Flores, and after cleaning the skull up, he poured the seeds into the skull. This would enable him to estimate the size of the brain that the skull had once contained. And whereas he expected to use only about 1.5 liters of the seeds, he could only fit 400 millimeters. He was shocked, to say the least. It didn't make any sense. According to Professor Brown, and this is a quote, "The last time things with a brain that size walked was around 2.5 million to 3 million years ago." Not only that, but when the skull was carbon dated, it was found to be around 18,000 years old. He was holding in his hand something which shouldn't be there. The skull of a small hominid that was 18,000 years old, but which had had a brain the size of hominids that lived as far back as 3 million years. And to top it off, the more they examined the remains, and the more they found in the cave, it all suggested that the skull he was holding wasn't human at all. The skull and its skeleton are now known as LB1, being the first one found in the Liang Bua cave. We now know it not to be a child, but a female which they refer to as Flo, or the Little Lady of Flores. Why little? Well, that's an easy one. Flo stood no more than 1.1 meters tall, and that's 3.5 feet. Flo was 30 years old when she died. And she wasn't alone. Since the discovery of her remains, there have been 9 more, and most are partial remains, but they all substantiate the evidence from the first find. That is, the remains do not appear to be that of modern humans. They are all very small. Also found were stone tools thought to be used by Flo and others like her. The team has also found evidence of fire use. The stegodon bones found in the cave show signs that the stone tools were used to cut the meat off of the bones, perhaps to be cooked. Flo and the rest of the skeletal remains uncovered in the Liang Bua cave are now believed to be a completely separate species from us being modern humans, of course. And this new species has been given the name Homo floresiensis. It even has a nickname, the Hobbit. The amazing thing is that the Hobbits of Flores were hunting the forests of Flores as recently as 12,000 years ago. In the grand scheme of things, that's very recent. Consider the fact that the Neanderthal, another species of hominid that walked the earth when we did, last did so between 25 to 40,000 years ago, give or take a few thousand. That makes the Hobbits our most recently deceased human cousins. Remember, they are human, just not modern humans, as was the Neanderthal. We are all of the genus Homo. Now, if you want to learn more about the Neanderthal, just listen to the episodes titled The Neanderthal and Neanderthalis Extinctus. The question remains, if the Hobbits of Flores are in fact a new species of human, where did they come from? Or who did they descend from? The skulls seem to point to descent from Homo erectus. And it's not just the skulls that tell the story. The wrist bones also differentiate Homo floresiensis from modern humans. They are more like chimpanzee wrists than they are like ours. And the arms and shoulders appear to predate modern humans as well, as far as their development is concerned. Now, of course, not everyone agrees. There are those of the opinion that we are not looking at a new species of human, but that we're instead looking at the remains of modern humans afflicted with one pathology or another. And we'll start with the theory that the Hobbits of Flores are modern humans that were born without a properly functioning thyroid. And this would cause cretinism, and that affects the physical and mental growth of an individual. It basically stops the individual from progressing and results in a person of a very small stature and impaired intelligence. Another theory is that the Hobbits suffered from a disease known as Laron syndrome, which is a genetic disorder that also affects the growth of the afflicted person. The discoverer of the syndrome, an endocrinologist, also supported this theory. And then there's microcephaly, another genetic disorder which affects the growth of the skull and the brain size. And more recently, it has been proposed that the Hobbits were simply sufferers of Down syndrome. One has to ask, though, how could it be that every individual had the exact same pathology? Remember, there have been 9 individuals found so far, or the remains of 9 individuals. And to combat that pathology theories, a CT scan was performed on Flo's skull. As well as the scan, a computer-generated model of the skull's interior was created. And this is called a virtual endocast. And these were examined by a team led by Professor Dean Falk from Florida State University. They compared the scan and the endocast of Flo to that of modern humans afflicted with microcephaly as well as those with normal brains. And the conclusion? Flo's skull is similar in shape to a normal human, but it is different enough to not be that of a modern human. And on top of that, the brain's development does not appear to have been stunted by any known pathology, including Laron syndrome, microcephaly, or anything else.
Whenever something important is discovered, it seems, there's always a small group, there's always a large group of the public, and there's always a small group of scientists that naysay. Okay, they just can't believe it's real. And this happened with Tong in 1925.
And that's Professor Falk, the leader of the team that examined the CT scans and the virtual endocast.
So they say that, no, it's an aberrant ape, or it's just a pathological specimen, for instance, Neanderthals. Or in the case of LB1, the suggestion has been made that, no, this is a human being, a Homo sapiens, that was afflicted with disease.
The Tong child that Professor Falk is referring to is the fossil of a child that was found in 1924 near Tong, South Africa by anthropologist Raymond Dart. At the time, he was ridiculed by practically everyone. Eventually, his find was found to be a different species from that of modern human, and it was the very first fossil discovery of the Australopithecus africanus. Dart took an academic beating over his discovery and was fortunately vindicated in the end. You might be thinking, what about DNA? Why haven't they tried that? Well, you wouldn't be alone. A DNA test could tell us once and for all exactly what it is we are looking at when we look at the Hobbit bones. And in 2006, 2 separate attempts to extract DNA from a tooth failed. At this point in time, it does appear unlikely that a thorough DNA analysis will ever take place. This, of course, allows the critics and the skeptics to continue their assault on the idea that the Liang Bua cave in Flores contained anything other than modern humans afflicted by something. A stance that Professor Michael Morwood once called similar to those who still like to argue that the Earth is flat. Remember, their discovery came about because the team which found the bones at Liang Bua were tracing the migration of modern humans from Asia to Australia. What they found was evidence of a small race of hominids that lived in Flores not much longer than 12,000 years ago. If they are not modern humans, then what does this say about the migration studies? It raises a very interesting question.
Sometimes small animals get big on islands, and sometimes large animals get small on islands. This has been codified into an evolutionary rule by some people. It's the island rule, if you would. And really what I want to revisit today is the question, can the island dwarfing, or the island rule, explain Hobbit body size and shape, or Hobbit body size and design?
And that's American anthropologist William Youngers. The island rule he mentioned is also referred to as Foster's rule after biologist Bristol Foster. What it describes is a principle that explains the size of animals in response to their environment, in this case an island. Depending on the food resources available, a species may be larger or smaller than their mainland peers. If they are smaller, like the stegodons found on Flores, then it points to insular dwarfism, which simply means that they evolved to be a smaller species. This could be directly attributed to the fact that the rainforest, like the one on Flores, tends to cause strains on an animal's growth. Those animals which adapt to this strain with a smaller body size will fare better than those with a larger body size which require more food and energy. The same can be said for an abundance of food on an island. That could lead to gigantism, or a larger species than their mainland counterparts. This leads us back to the Hobbits. Could it be that they are examples of the island rule as applied to, say, a group of Homo erectus which journeyed from Southeast Asia to Flores?
If the Hobbits are insular dwarves derived from Southeast Asian Homo erectus, then evolutionary reversals need to be invoked from head to toe. We need in the brains, perhaps in jaws as well, inside and out, as part of a unique and unprecedented process that would be completely unpredicted by island dwarfing in hominids.
That could explain it. But what if they are not examples of insular dwarfism? What if they are not a speciated version of Homo erectus?
If Homo floresiensis is descended from a small-bodied, small-brained hominid more primitive than Homo erectus, then an early out-of-Africa event that Mike Morwood mentioned is conceivable. But obviously this needs paleontological confirmation. But this is where I'm placing my bets for now, based on the evidence in hand.
Don't forget, when the bones were first found, Professor Peter Brown stated that the last time things with a brain that size walked the Earth around 2.5 to 3 million years ago. If that's the case, then that out-of-Africa event may have happened much earlier than previously thought. The entire history of hominid migration will need to be rewritten, and all because of these little hobbits on Flores. So where did they go? One theory suggests that a volcano did them in. There is evidence on Flores that a volcanic eruption did indeed occur on the island 12,000 years ago. This would have severely and tragically altered the island's ability to sustain life for those who survived the eruption itself. And this coincides with the fact that the stegodons also disappeared from the islands 12,000 years ago. Now, if that was one of their main sources of food, and the eruption didn't do them all in, the lack of food afterwards would have. Now, let's say that this did happen and most of the hobbits died out as a result of the eruption, either as a direct result or from starvation afterwards. Now, let's also say that some struggled through it, a small group who managed to eke out an existence until the island gradually restored itself. Might this account for those old stories of the Ibugogo, that little race of hairy cave dwellers who haunted the forests up until a few hundred years ago? On the island of Sumatra, there have been reports of a similar hominid called the orang pendek.
The possibility certainly exists and should be considered that orang pendek and Homo floresiensis are one and the same.
That was Professor Jeff Meldrum, as interviewed on an episode of Monster Quest. Now, while this is sensationalized for TV, it isn't out of the question. In an article written for Nature magazine, senior editor and evolutionary biologist Henry G. wrote that human evolution is not a ladder, it's more like a bush. He also speculates in the article that the discovery of Homo floresiensis might lend a little more credibility to the sightings of the orang pendek in recent years. Of course, it's only speculation and a bit of fun, but who knows? Many thanks to Chris Whiteowl, whose email inspired this episode. Evolution Talk is written and produced by myself, Rick Coast. The music on this episode was composed and performed by Poddington Bear. Support for Evolution Talk comes from you, simply by listening. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can always reach me by using the site's contact page at evolutiontalk.com or on Twitter, where you can find me at Rick Coast. And most of all, thank you for listening. And until next time, please take care of yourself.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.